Blue lights hit your rearview mirror, and your stomach drops before your brain even catches up. You slow down, signal, pull to the side. The engine is still running. Your hands are on the wheel. Then you notice something strange. Before the officer even says much, there's a faint purple glow sweeping across your seats, your dashboard, your door panels. A UV light. And just like that, the stop doesn't feel routine anymore. Have you ever been in a traffic stop where something felt off, like the officer was looking for something you didn't understand, or asking questions that didn't quite make sense? Tell me exactly what happened in the comments, because what you experienced might be more important than you realized, and I'm going to explain why as we go. Let's get into this carefully, because this is one of those situations where small decisions, tiny, almost invisible mistakes, can change the entire outcome of a traffic stop. Most drivers don't expect a UV light. They expect a flashlight, maybe a quick check, maybe a question about where they're headed. But a UV light changes the tone immediately. It signals something very specific. The officer is not just checking your license or verifying your identity. They're scanning for evidence, biological traces, fluids, residues, sometimes even signs of drug activity or attempts to clean something up. Now here's the part that most people get wrong. When that UV light comes out, many drivers instinctively start talking more. They try to explain things that haven't even been asked yet. They shift in their seat. They laugh nervously. They say things like, "Oh, I just cleaned my car," or "I had a spill earlier," or worse, "That's probably from my friend." That instinct to fill silence is exactly what can get you into trouble. Officers are trained to watch behavior just as much as they look for physical evidence. That UV light is not just about what it reveals on your seats. It's about what it reveals in you. Your voice, your breathing, your eye movement, your willingness to volunteer information. Think about it from their perspective. They walk up to a vehicle. They don't know you. They don't know your intentions. Every stop is potentially dangerous. So they're observing everything. Your hands, your tone, how quickly you respond, whether your story changes, whether you're overly defensive or overly cooperative. Now add a UV scan into that mix. If they see something that lights up, or even if they don't, they're watching how you react to the possibility that something might be found. And here's where the critical moment happens. Before they ask to enter your vehicle, before they escalate the stop, there is often a pause, a subtle shift. They might say something like, "Mind if I take a closer look inside your car?" Or, "Is there anything in the vehicle I should know about?" Or even more casually, "You mind stepping out for a second?" This is where most drivers unknowingly give away their rights, because they think cooperation means saying yes. Let me be very clear, calmly, realistically, without exaggeration. You do not have to consent to a search of your vehicle in most situations, and how you say that matters just as much as what you say. This is the sentence, simple, controlled, and legally grounded, that changes everything. I don't consent to any searches. That's it. No attitude, no explanation, no sarcasm, no nervous laughter, just calm, steady, and clear. Now you might be thinking, won't that make things worse? That's one of the biggest myths out there. Officers may not like hearing it. It may change their tone slightly. It may make the situation feel more tense. But invoking your rights, respectfully, does not give them legal grounds to punish you. What it does is remove your voluntary participation from the equation. And that matters more than most people realize. Because once you consent, everything changes. Anything they find, no matter how minor, no matter how unrelated, becomes fair game. That coffee stain you joked about? That wrapper you forgot? That item a passenger left behind? It all becomes part of the narrative. But if you don't consent, the officer has to rely on something else. Probable cause. And this is where the UV light becomes psychologically powerful. It can create the impression that something suspicious exists, even if it doesn't. It can make drivers second-guess themselves. It can pressure them into thinking, if I don't let them look, It'll seem like I'm hiding something. That internal pressure is exactly what leads to consent. Let's walk through a realistic scenario. You're pulled over for a minor traffic violation, speeding maybe. The officer approaches, asks for your license and registration. You hand them over. Everything feels normal. Then they shine that UV light across your interior. You notice it immediately. You start wondering, what are they looking for? Did something spill? Did someone leave something in here? The officer doesn't say much at first, just scans, quiet, observing. Then comes the question, where are you coming from tonight? Seems harmless, right? But it's not just small talk, it's a baseline question. They're listening to how you answer. Quickly? Hesitantly? Do you add extra details? Do you contradict yourself later? You answer. Then another question. Anyone else been in the car today? Now your brain starts racing. Why are they asking that? And this is where people start over-explaining. Yeah, my friend was in here earlier, we went to... You see how quickly that happens? Now you've introduced another person into the situation, another variable, another line of questioning. All of this, while the officer is still holding your documents longer than expected. That delay? It's not random. It's part of the observation process. Time allows pressure to build. Silence makes people talk. Then the officer circles back. Mind if I take a quick look inside? This is the moment. If you say yes, everything that follows is based on your permission. If you say, I don't consent to any searches, the dynamic shifts. The officer may respond with, why not? If you've got nothing to hide, it shouldn't be a problem. That line has been used thousands of times. It's designed to make you feel unreasonable. But think about it. Rights are not based on whether you have something to hide. They exist precisely so you don't have to prove your innocence on the spot, under pressure, in a roadside setting. Now here's where things get even more nuanced. Even if you refuse consent, the officer might still proceed with a search if they believe they have probable cause. That could come from something they claim to observe, an odor, an item in plain view, inconsistent statements, or behavior they interpret as suspicious. This is why your behavior before that moment matters so much. Nervous movements, reaching around, sudden changes in tone, contradicting yourself. All of these can be used to justify further action. So the goal is not just to refuse consent, it's to maintain consistency from the moment the stop begins. Hands visible, movements slow, answers short and direct. You're not there to convince them of anything. You're there to avoid giving unnecessary information that can be misinterpreted. Let's talk about passengers for a second, because this is another area where things quietly fall apart. An officer may shine the UV light across the passenger side, then ask the passenger questions. Where are you guys headed? What's your name? Passengers often feel less prepared. They may answer differently than the driver. Even small inconsistencies, nothing intentional, can create suspicion. Now the officer has two slightly different stories. That's all it takes to extend the stop. And while that's happening, your documents are still being held. That's another subtle pressure point. Many drivers feel like they can't leave because the officer still has their license. So they stay engaged in conversation longer than necessary. Here's the reality. The stop should be limited to its original purpose, unless new factors legally justify extending it. But most drivers don't challenge that. They just go along with the flow. Now let's circle back to the UV light itself. In some cases, it's used to detect bodily fluids. In others, it's used in conjunction with drug interdiction techniques. It can highlight residues that aren't visible under normal light. But here's the key point. The presence of a UV light does not automatically mean there is evidence. It's a tool, not proof. The danger is not the light, it's how you react to it. Because once you start explaining things that haven't been questioned, you're building a narrative for them. And narratives are powerful in roadside situations. Let me give you a moment that happens more often than people admit. The officer shines the UV light, pauses. You say, "Oh, that's probably just from when I spilled something last week." The officer didn't ask about a spill, but now you've introduced one, so they follow up. What did you spill? Now you're in a conversation you didn't need to have. This is how simple stops become complicated. Silence, used correctly, is not suspicious. It's controlled. But silence used incorrectly, combined with nervous behavior, can be misinterpreted. So it's about balance. You respond when necessary. You provide required documents. You remain respectful. But you don't fill every gap with unnecessary details. And when it comes to entry into your vehicle, you draw a clear line. I don't consent to any searches. Say it once, calmly. If they ask again, you can repeat it. No need to escalate. No need to argue roadside law. Because here's another truth that people don't like hearing. The roadside is not the place to win a legal debate. If something goes wrong, it gets addressed later, through legal channels. Your goal during the stop is simple. Don't make the situation worse. Now let's talk about tone, because this is where things become very human. Officers are trained, but they're also people. Tone affects everything. If you sound aggressive, sarcastic, or dismissive, the interaction can shift quickly. But if you sound calm, controlled, and consistent, it's much harder to justify escalation based on behavior alone. Even something as simple as how you say no matters. Compare these two. I'm not letting you search my car. Versus, I don't consent to any searches. Same meaning, completely different impact. One sounds confrontational, the other sounds procedural. That difference can shape the rest of the encounter. And here's something else most drivers don't consider. Hesitation. When you hesitate before refusing consent, it signals internal conflict. That can be interpreted as uncertainty or concealment. So, if you're going to assert your rights, do it cleanly. No long pauses, no trailing sentences, just clarity. Now, I want to touch on something that often gets overlooked. Sometimes officers will not immediately push for a search. Instead, they'll keep the conversation going. They'll ask about your day, your plans, your destination. This is not random. It's a way to gather more information, observe your consistency, and potentially develop probable cause through conversation rather than direct search. And during this time, that UV light might come out again. Another scan, another pause. It's all part of building a bigger picture. The longer the interaction goes, the more opportunities there are for small inconsistencies, and small inconsistencies can become big problems. So you have to stay mentally present, not paranoid, not defensive, just aware. Because most mistakes don't come from bad intentions. They come from pressure, confusion, and the natural instinct to help the situation by talking more. But more talking rarely helps. It usually just creates more angles for interpretation. Let's bring this back to that original moment. The UV light, the pause, the question. This is where awareness changes outcomes. You recognize what's happening. You stay calm. You don't overreact. And when the moment comes, you draw a clear, respectful boundary. I don't consent to any searches. After that, you let the situation play out. If the officer proceeds, you don't physically resist. You don't argue on the roadside. You observe. You remember. Because what happens next is not about winning in that moment. It's about protecting yourself from making a situation worse than it needs to be. And that's something most drivers don't realize until it's too late. So next time you see those lights in your mirror and something feels just slightly different, maybe it's a UV glow, maybe it's a longer pause, maybe it's a question that doesn't quite fit, pay attention to that feeling, because that's the moment where awareness matters more than anything you say.